about this fear I hear repeated to me. What if the rest of the world gets what I have? That would be terrible. Remember, wealthier is healthier. Wealthier is also cleaner. There are reasons for this, but it comes down essentially to wealthy societies assign an economic value once they create more wealth to various media. Name it. Clean water, clean air, parts per thousand, parts per million, global warming. They create wealth first, then they assign an economic value, adopt regulations. When they continue to get wealthy, they tighten those regulations. As I say to people, go to Haiti, ask them about their Clean Air Act. And they're going to tell you I have first order needs: food, fuel, and medicine. When I get rich, I'll pass a Clean Air Act. I will then measure in the parts per thousand, then in the parts per million. When I get richer, I will measure in the parts per billion. When I get really rich, I will pretend that I can control the weather. But for now, I need food, fuel, and medicine. Now, in addition to being healthier and cleaner, wealthy countries, whether you view this as good or bad, have fewer babies. So the idea has some false assumptions. What if these poor countries having so many babies get what I have? The truth is, they will then stop having so many babies, whether you view that as a positive or a negative outcome. The philosophies are varied, but essentially rich countries hire people. Poor countries have children. Rich countries don't replace their children, and they bring in the children that were born in the poor countries to hire. There's some false assumptions in the model. What if China gets cars? That will be a good thing. The richer they get, the cleaner they'll get. And if you think population is a concern, you should also feel very comfortable that they will also, poorer countries, stop having. China has policies focusing on their birth rate, but other countries, you will see, will get to rich country levels on what we call fertility. Now, I want to follow up on this idea the professor raised about inefficiency being a good thing. That was not his idea. And of all the countries where one shouldn't expect it to be promoted, I would imagine I wouldn't hear it in Germany very often. But it is actually the model, the argument behind green jobs. This is a United States senator, so you should have low expectations. But he reprinted, essentially, along with 4 other senators, a solar industry press release where they boasted solar industry creates more workers per unit of energy produced than any other form of producing electricity. They're selling short the idea of all of us running on giant hamster wheels to produce electricity, or bicycles to create, or turning a giant crank. There are less efficient ways, but not many. But when somebody says it requires more workers per kilowatt hour of energy produced, you say, then I want nothing to do with you. They're selling it as a virtue. In fact, one website humorously called this a great moment in business analysis. Why, I can top that. I've got something so inefficient it takes 10 workers per unit of energy produced. They just say 5 times. So, we have a president who has the same philosophy. O, as in Obama, O on ATMs. He said that automatic teller machines, where you take your bank card out and draw cash, and those awful airport kiosk machines where you slide a credit card and get your boarding pass, that's what's killing our employment numbers. He said this, leading someone to say, should the government ban ATMs and create not shovel-ready projects, but spoon-ready projects? As Paul Krugman would say, translated, get a job digging holes, dig with spoon. Job lasts longer. More workers. So we've got this, turning to this, reminding us that, as I pointed out, everything creates jobs. Not on net, Computer viruses create jobs. Tsunamis create jobs, or as our Environmental Protection Administrator calls them, opportunities. She went on television to say, our regulations create opportunities. Because when I require you to prematurely retire capital, destroy it, or add some equipment, why, you have to hire somebody to do it. You see, that creates jobs. She said opportunities. Imagine the opportunities. Not on net, they don't. This is, I will leave to you, but translated, thank you for Google Translate, we're no longer even pretending otherwise. You're talking about European consumers will need to get used in coming years to significantly higher energy prices. The household expenditure for energy will double by 2030, which means fuel poverty will double. This comes from an internal draft EU energy policy paper. So, the price will rise in 2030, adjusted for inflation, up to 50%, but then decline slightly, which means we'll be killing jobs. Right? So the argument in America is green jobs means more employment because I see what I see. If I pretend I can focus only on what I do see, why it creates jobs. But we know green jobs means, as they say, pink slips, red ink, and dark times. Now, on to our regularly scheduled program. The IPCC and transparency. I have been using the Freedom of Information Act, which several countries have. I don't know about Germany. Okay. The UK has one. Other countries do. Some countries do not. We have had it since the 1970s. 60s, actually. And we have amended it several times. But we use it because, as our Supreme Court has said, I'll just say FOIA. FOIA. Freedom of Information Act. FOIA is the acronym. They said FOIA is a law so that taxpayers can know what their government is up to. So that's the point, and that's a problem for many people. So I'm going to cover the IPCC history of dealing with requests for transparency. These go, as you heard from Andrew earlier, and they began with requests for author data for work that was advertised in, promoted by the IPCC reports. Requests for reviewer comments, requests for treatment of the reviewer comments, and IPCC related work. Remember, this is work produced on the taxpayer's dollar or euro, taxpayer time, in a taxpayer office as part of their taxpayer-funded job. But they're now acting like if I slap an IPCC sticker on it, you can no longer see it. But the IPCC saying something should be shielded doesn't make it so. It's still covered by the law. I'll address the IPCC recognition of this and response to this, which they saw as a threat, their author panic, and an organized campaign to obstruct and delete records. The problem that this poses, because money comes with strings, believe it or not. I know that's a horror to some people, but it does. It's made worse when we catch U.S. agencies not just stonewalling us, but then getting caught, and lately, the IPCC's latest move, which is to, you'll see it's exercising what I call tradecraft if you read spy novels. They are moving things, they're creating safe houses and dead drop zones to avoid national FOIA laws. So, in the IPCC's own words, their governing principles says their role is, quote, to assess on a comprehensive, open and transparent basis the scientific, technical, and socioeconomic information, etc., emphasis added. It is one of their 3 self-assigned hallmarks. But they haven't been treating this like they take it seriously. The first request was to see reviewer comments. The IPCC resisted, but then, through a series of actions, relented, made them available in a very limited way, and then began behaving strangely because they realized, wait a minute, if they want to see this, they may want to see more. And from our perspective, the less they see, the better, and we found out why. So, They provided a series of excuses. The first was, well, it's already available on the internet, without saying where. We deleted it. It's personal. It would prejudice relations. Those last three were given by the same person, seriatim, in response to continued requests. Then, of course, the famous, we lost it. Not yet. Patience. I've been told to move slowly. We were told we lost it. Remember, ClimateGate those records were subject to the UK's FOIA law. Also remember that many of them were subject to the United States FOIA law and others. I've gotten many of those records from what's called NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, under FOIA. But the requests were being denied in the UK on a changing series of excuses that were getting absurd. Well, you don't deserve them because you don't meet this new criteria I'm creating, but which is not in the law. And finally, somebody wrote to say, I meet all of your new, non-existent criteria, give me the records. At which point they said, we lost it. At which point somebody leaked the first batch. Now Andrew's coming around to saying it's hacked. So far I'm waiting for evidence to say it was hacked or stolen. Right now, as far as we can tell, it was leaked by somebody, obviously had access, who may have tired of these false excuses. Regardless, we are constantly told, whether it's a Senate hearing, whether it's WikiLeaks, I don't care how you got it. What's as important is what's in the record. Okay, if that's your standard. And I say this as someone who has his trash stolen by Greenpeace on a regular basis, or used to, weekly. And it would end up in The Guardian, Independent, Deutsche Welle, Aftonbladet, El País, without calling me. If they're stolen, that's a criminal act. But we're talking about records subject to FOIA, various FOIAs. So, regarding the FOIA request for how the IPCC treated reviewer comments. Well, someone noted, David Holland noted, that IPCC procedures assign the review editors the responsibility of making sure that the review comments are, quote, afforded appropriate consideration. That is, treat them seriously, respond to them by changing the work or explaining why you're rejecting them. And that, quote, genuine controversies are reflected adequately in the text. So he wanted to see the comments. The author responded, well, I have not kept any papers. I don't have to. So given that the IPCC already has lots of stuff out there, you're not going to get them, but I can keep them anyway. And then the same man said, well, we've already deleted them. And they're not held by the Met Office. And then he said, I incorrectly said that before. I did this in my personal capacity. Yeah, that's it. And not on the behalf of the Met Office, which means that you can't have any of it. It's not covered by the Act. Same person, as we saw before, a series of reasons why. But here's where it got interesting. The Met Office has liaised with the IPCC Secretariat, and we've been instructed by the IPCC. Remember, who does not have the authority to say what US or UK or German law says, or to say you can't do this. The law says what it says. It's a condition of employment for the with the taxpayer. We've been instructed by the IPCC that we're not to allow any emails to be released without everybody involved participating. But you're changing things after the fact. The condition was, if you take my money, you take my strings. Well, they didn't like that because people suddenly started asking. This is an email saying that, this is in the UK at the University of East Anglia, saying, look, we need you all to get for us in defending against these Freedom of Information Act requests. Now remember, Freedom of Information Act requests, according to the laws, are not to be defended against. The laws are to be interpreted liberally, and any exclusions to be interpreted narrowly in favor of, with a bias toward, disclosure. They all say this. I need from you all, he says, input from the IPCC to the effect that this would harm international relations. go out there and get me an excuse why I can't release these records. I need you to go to the IPCC and tell me how this would hurt them too. Remember, it's not, I have a request for information. The information is covered by our law. Please give me the information, and I will review it for exemptions. The request was, talk to the IPCC, give me reasons to deny this. That's a red flag. Then the party line became obvious, which Andrew addressed. It begat bigger problems. What was the party line? Well, we've seen this in a footnote. In the United States, an inspector general has gotten involved at a U.S. agency, the Department of Commerce, because it turned out that FOIA requests were being unlawfully withheld. That is, we were being lied to by federal employees, and there was an inquiry. Part of that inquiry, incidentally, involved Michael Mann and him passing along to Eugene Wall, who Andrew mentioned, the request from Phil Jones to delete records. In the Penn State inquiry, which wasn't, they asked him, Michael Mann, did you ever directly or indirectly delete or participate in the deletion of records? And he said, I never directly deleted records. And they said, that sounds good enough for us. True story. Well, the obvious question was, okay, I'll ask Mr. Wall now. Well, the Inspector General did, and Eugene Wall said, yes, I deleted the records after Michael passed that request along to me. So we've got this IG report, and there's a footnote in the report indicating that the IPCC had its suspicions and its fears that author deletions would begin soon. And this footnote is cut and paste from the report. And it says, after the fourth assessment report, the IPCC told its participants that it can't provide them any legal advice as to whether IPCC related. Remember, it's IPCC related. It's created on a US government agency computer, a UK government agency computer. It's covered. Whether these documents constitute agency records if the agency holds them. You're right, it's not the IPCC's job to pretend to interpret US law, although previously they were giving instructions. And so we can't tell you whether they'd be subject to release under individual FOIA laws. The IPCC authors had, in fact, however, just begun their campaign to delete IPCC-related email. Just before the IPCC publicly notified them, I'm not a lawyer, you'll have to contact your agency's lawyer. Well, in this Inspector General report, the agency lawyer did ask the lead U.S. representative to the IPCC, named Susan Solomon, why do you keep telling people that you won't release IPCC records to them? And she said, the lawyers told me not to because they're IPCC records. The two lawyers said, no, we did not. Now, I don't know who to believe here. Someone who doesn't want her emails released and swears the lawyers told her not to? Or two lawyers who could have their licenses to practice law revoked if they lied to an inspector general? I'll leave it to you. But anyway, what we found was then in ClimateGate, this series of emails revealed, hey, Mike, can you delete any emails you may have had with Keith Briffa regarding the fourth assessment report? Keith will do likewise. Andrew already showed you this email. Mann says, I'll contact Eugene Wall. Mann did contact Eugene Wall. Eugene Wall did delete records. And so on. More emails from Phil Jones. Could you guys delete records? And here's what you should say if asked. So this was very deliberate, very thoughtful in that it wasn't rash. They gave themselves a very good reason and told their colleagues, here are your excuses. Keith should say he didn't get anything extra. So these excuses extend, it appears, to telling people or saying our colleagues will lie. They really didn't want these things out. Now, at least in the US, all these records were created with the knowledge that they were subject to FOIA. In fact, at the University of Virginia, who we are suing, there's a form that Michael Mann signed saying he got it, he understood. I have no privacy interest in these records that I create on my email account. I have no expectation of privacy or property right. He literally signed up for it. Here are some emails from ClimateGate 2.0, or SFI, just out this week. Here's how we're going to do it. let's delete the records. They're all out there. This is part of ClimateGate 2.0. There's a particular focus on destroying IPCC records, from Phil Jones, Briffa, this guy McGarvey at the UEA, and Jones again, talking about deleting records to evade FOIA. Now you're getting in very legally dicey grounds. Regardless, the taxpayer still has a right to these records. Now this is a reminder, Andrew covered how the inquiries into ClimateGate were no such thing, they were whitewashes. This is a reminder, and ClimateGate 2.0 merely provided us more evidence of the same. Andrew quoted the Muir-Russell report, which concluded they had seen no evidence of any attempt to delete information in respect of a request already made. Hey, I got this request for these records, delete these records. Okay, they didn't find that. That's not exoneration. Given all that's out there, there was an admitted, agreed, written campaign to delete emails to get around to circumvent FOIA. So that is legally, deliberately, and lawyerly drafted. And it obviously elides the question that one would believe was before them. Did they engage in a campaign of deletion? But they didn't ask that. It begs the question why, and Andrew pointed out why, and above is why. These emails expose the team for the reasons pointed out. They were politicizing, they were perverting peer review, they were perverting the IPCC process, and they were creating falsely tidy stories. And this is important. We learned in ClimateGate 2, according to Michael Mann, who used this phrase over and over and over again, for the cause. He said for the cause. This is not helpful to the cause. We'll do this for the cause. The cause was not science. The cause was Kyoto and the Kyoto agenda. How do we know? One of his emails is very upset about an author of a journal, Sandra Boehmer Christensen, saying she opposes the Kyoto agenda. How dare she have a cause? Only we can. It's like, how dare I use FOIA? It was a law drafted by them for them. So this is evidence that they were not as ignorant of the facts, this deliberate, lawyerly phrasing of the questions, just like with the Penn State inquiry, where they say, did you participate directly or indirectly? He says, not directly. And they say, that's good enough for us. A child could figure this out. It was intentional. It was not as absurd as the report led us to believe. A second sign of trouble, I say second, though it emerged at about the same time as the effort to impede transparency. The drafting and the review processes were exposed by Hide the Decline, which Andrew Montford covered. A deliberate behind-the-scenes effort by IPCC to present a falsely tidy story, to conceal differences that existed among the published research. This wasn't discovered for 6 years, and it was not confirmed for 8 years. This demands transparency of communications. As the IPCC itself, when it first got countries to pay the bill, like us, to sign up for it, one of our 3 goals is transparency, so long as we don't actually have to adopt transparency. Recent US, UK, and European FOIA FOI rulings affirm IPCC-related expert correspondence are agency records, subject to the Act. This must be recognized in IPCC rules, and instead it is being dodged in an orchestrated fashion. And as you'll see, the reason I asked Wolfgang if I could address this point, the reason is we found out 2 weeks ago about their latest move. This is inescapably, deliberately designed to get around transparency, while they hold it out as one of their 3 objectives in order to get countries to sign up and pay their bill. So consider this evidence. This is from ClimateGate 2.0. That shows that IPCC review of the literature did not merely miss key articles, but actively excluded them when an author found them to be in conflict with his personal opinions. What's the point of doing it, as someone asked earlier? And we'd seen this before. We'd seen that they'd cited a single non-peer-reviewed paper to the exclusion of inconvenient peer-reviewed work because it fit the narrative. And if you read the ClimateGate 2 emails, the key ones that were highlighted by the person who published them first, you'll see that they were talking about, well, we need to decide what our message is and then pull together the evidence that supports that message to support it. That was their objective, but that is not the IPCC's objective. Not de jure. De facto, it clearly is. So this is from Roger Pielke Jr., who is not what you call a skeptic, but has been the target of the alarmists' ire because he is insufficiently alarmist. And he pointed out that previously we had seen the IPCC ignore papers, and with ClimateGate 2.0 we have seen why a particular paper of his on hurricanes was excluded. The reviews associated with the release of the UEA emails conclude, remember the reviews, Muir-Russell, UK Parliament Science Committee, they claimed no papers were purposely kept out of the IPCC. This is now demonstrably false. It seems clear that if they would have looked at the evidence, sincerely, they would have reached that conclusion before, but now it is impossible to not reach any other conclusion, but that they did. Now, what Pielke showed. There's a 2005 exchange between two stars of ClimateGate, both 1 and 2, showing them deciding together to exclude a paper, and for, quote, political reasons, and it was excluded. And here's the exchange. This is a now famous, in the last few days, post about ClimateGate 2. You can find it. It involves Roger Pielke Jr. talking about Kevin Trenberth and Phil Jones collaborating to exclude a paper because they found it political for their taste. That is, it didn't reach the desired conclusions. And Pielke writes, the gatekeeping of the IPCC process is now abundantly clear. And that's not their role. And the shadowy suggestion in these emails, by the way, that they can find out who the reviewers are, we're going to find out who those reviewers are. There's a lot of that in ClimateGate 1 and 2. There's a lot of, we're going to get that Willie soon and Sally Ballounis. I think Harvard's had enough. We're expecting a development soon. Chris DeFreitas, a journal editor, has to go. This new one, Sayer, the journal editor, has to go. Whatever the cause is, again, there's a cause, but it isn't science. So grasping the threat that FOIA laws posed, the IPCC team leapt into action. This is an email from ClimateGate 1, actually, to Tom Wigley from Phil Jones. It's before an IPCC meeting, and he says, I have got the IPCC Secretariat and Thomas, you'll see Thomas in a moment, to raise the FOIA issues with the full IPCC plenary, which meets in Bali in September or October. Thomas is fully aware of all the issues we've had here at CRU with regard to a channel 6 last time. Chapter 6. And others in the US have had with FOIA. So they've got to find a way to work around it. Now the problem for us in the US is that the IPCC relies on our dollars. Our dollars come with strings. I'm not troubled, but sorry if they don't care for that, then don't take the money. But they know it comes with strings. It is not to then be designed around transparency. FOIA is one of those strings. US government employees' work is to be transparent. US government employees working on the IPCC have not been detailed or seconded. And this is a conclusion of the Inspector General, who said, we looked and there's no evidence they were doing anything but their official job for the taxpayer. FOIA is a mean for citizens to know, quote, what their government is up to, according to the Supreme Court. With a strong presumption in favor of disclosure, it is, quote, to shed light on an agency's performance of its statutory duties. Well, the US government rationalizes spending so much on its employees doing so much work for the IPCC related projects by saying this is part of their job. Part of their job is to help develop this because we are a participating government. In their taxpayer-funded job, they are doing this for their agency. FOIA applies to these records. So in ClimateGate 1, we saw that US government agencies were stonewalling. That led to the Inspector General report I was speaking about. That's this. It came out in February. And in it, they said, we found a reference in the ClimateGate 1 emails about a FOIA request submitted to this government agency, NOAA. And we noticed that NOAA said, no, we don't have any such records because to the extent we have them, they're really the IPCC's. created on taxpayer time, on a taxpayer computer, sitting in a taxpayer-funded chair, in a taxpayer office. But it really belongs to the UN, so you can't see it. Well, the Inspector General said, we're going to look into that because that's not actually true. The NOAA, the agency, this is Susan Solomon, informed each requester, Steve McIntyre, then 3 others, and then about 18 months ago, me. I got a phone call from NOAA once. Actually, I called them saying, what's the holdup? And they called me back and they said, well, we found 8,000 responsive documents. The delay is trying to figure out which are agency records and which are IPCC records. Now, I had just won on an appeal with NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, regarding Gavin Schmidt records. He's one of the Real Climate team, if you know that. Where they had admitted, look, he's doing this on taxpayer time. It's on a taxpayer computer. It's related to his job. You're right, they're your records. They still won't turn them over, by the way. We're in court. But they agreed that I was right. You just can't see them. So I notified them. I hung up the phone and confirmed this in writing. This is to confirm that you just said what she said. 3 days later, they wrote back, oh, of course these are agency records. But this Inspector General was on the case, it seems. But they had been telling people, and in writing, well, these are IPCC records, and so you can't have them. But that's legally not true. So Susan Solomon said, well, the lawyers made me say that. But the lawyers, not 1 but 2, said, no, we didn't. In fact, that's not what the law says. So again, you decide who to believe. So these records are subject to FOIA, and this is the conclusion of the Inspector General stating the obvious. In our view, any records created by these employees in the, quote, legitimate conduct of their official duties, close quote, including IPCC-related work, constitute agency records. Now, this is not US specific. This is a basic principle underlying FOI laws. Some country may interpret their own law differently, but this is fairly basic, black letter FOI law. And they should have been processed under FOIA to determine whether the records were releasable, that is, whether a real exemption applied. So what we've got here is what proved to be a fairly organized, that is, it was serial. 4 or 5 times just out of NOAA. And then also it turned out, other agencies saying, well, they're not really ours. They're the IPCC's, and the IPCC says they're not FOIA-able. But the IPCC then publicly said, we're not going to play a lawyer. You listen to your own. So Congress took the Inspector General's cue, and this is the House of Representatives Committee on Science, Space, and Technology 1 month ago, sending a letter to the administrator of NOAA saying, come clean. He said, give us these records. I see this history of FOIA requests that you're saying, I don't have any records. They belong to the UN. Yeah, they're on my computer, and, well, we created them, and it was on taxpayer time, but technically I don't have them. Congress, too, said, we're watching you. We write the checks. Cough up the records. We haven't seen them yet. Now, the reason is because this is exactly why FOIA was adopted, and not just the US FOIA. FOIAs are fairly fungible. They are everywhere adopted to let taxpayers know what their government is up to whatever degree the national legislature or state legislature determines. This is the latest move, which prompted my note to Wolfgang saying this is something people should know about. If you read spy novels, you'll see this as tradecraft. We have caught, using FOIA, senior officials, the controversial ones, they aren't discussed by their name in emails. We have found that they are given handles or code names. The Assistant Secretary of Energy for Renewable Energy used to be the CEO of Al Gore's pressure group. So you knew she would be the subject of FOIA requests. So Kathy Zoy wasn't discussed as Zoy, or the Assistant Secretary Kathy, because people would ask for records discussing her. She was called EE1. And we found them, we've got various creating these dead drops, FOIA-free zones, claiming the records don't belong to them. And then this latest one. We found them running third-party activist websites out of federal agencies and so on, making it appear that there's much more support, there's independent support for them, when in fact they were running it. So this IPCC practice, what they did is they set up non-governmental websites expressly, this is expressly we've seen in the communications, to get around FOIA. They've set up these safe houses whereby you perform official work on a non-governmental website. Now, if you follow US politics, as you'll see in a moment, this should sound familiar. It was scandalous when it involved someone named Bush. Not so much now. It was expressly to circumvent FOIA laws, but that doesn't change the law. It just works to get around the law, which is to say, to violate the law. The problem is that act itself violates the law. We also have something called the Presidential Records Act, because you can't have everything under the Freedom of Information Act. And some offices are actually exempt. The President's office is exempt. But various exempt White House offices are still covered by something called the Presidential Records Act, which makes sure there remains a record of everything done anyway. What does that say? You can't delete stuff. People who run around deleting stuff, why? So we have a law against that. And our White House Office of Science Technology Policy was run by someone you may know named John Holdren. John Holdren is the one who took control of the IPCC process after the president was inaugurated. It had been run out of NOAA. He moved it into the White House. So the worst problem is when you're getting government help doing this, because again, it's against the law. And it was a really big deal when someone named Bush did it. So I thought it was a big deal that wasn't just political or hypocritical. I thought it was a big deal. They told me it was a big deal. How big? Well, this is Holdren, who recently said, so what, about getting caught breaking a different law. Remember, laws are drafted for them, by them. Sensing growing danger, the IPCC leapt to action. You'll see the White House involvement in a minute. This is the report from the Busan meeting, October 2010, 11 to 14 October, submitted by Mr. Thomas Stocker. And in it, he says, this requires urgent attention. Challenges of modern methods of working and communication, this is very important and amusing. Given the experiences during and since the fourth assessment report, you could just say ClimateGate 1, this is a matter of urgent attention given what happened with ClimateGate. However, by 8th October, he had actually started instituting these practices. He had established closed electronic discussion fora for Working Group 1 to evade emails. We don't want to use email anymore. Those people will use the FOIA laws. And we don't want to do anything that might be captured by that. But again, just because you're trying to evade the law doesn't mean you do evade the law. But real quickly, here's a confidentiality notice. It's small print, but anyway, it was the same thing. In order to enhance communication, we're going to move things off-site at password-protected websites to get around FOIA. Remember, for direct conversations among two or several chapter authors, telephone conference facilities are better. You should use Skype, they say. And we're looking into the possibility of offering a website via the IPCC Secretariat. Now this was all, remember the email two emails ago? Thomas is aware of these things. Thomas has got things in hand. This is Phil Jones to Tom Wigley. This is Thomas's report. We're working on it. I understand these FOI laws are a problem for you. They're a problem for me. We're working on it. This is the same agency, body, IPCC, that was saying we can't give legal advice on whether these things are covered by FOIA. And they say, as has been customary in the private sector, we recommend that IPCC-related email traffic, that you add something to the signature saying, this isn't subject to FOIA. Well, good luck with that. I've never seen that actually work in court, but it was worth a try. It was their third suggestion here. And here's what they look like. There's Working Group 3. Now remember, everything you do on this is still a taxpayer record. Now the IPCC enlisted the Obama administration to create offline, non-governmental electronic fora for discussing production of those reports going forward. Looking back, they're still stonewalling McIntyre's requests, my requests, and 3 other requests for the NOAA IPCC related records in violation of the law. That's for what's happened. Going forward, they created offline fora to try to evade. So the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy led a government-wide effort to enable the UN to pull this off, expressly to frustrate national FOIA laws. Now remember, this was a big deal when it involved Bush, and now, well, it's different. You said global warming, right? This is the webpage of a gentleman who was running the investigation of the last time a US White House tried to do this, which was 3 years ago. And it was a really big deal. It led to the Abramoff investigation. It led to all sorts of things. Committee requests White House emails stored off-site be given to them. Committee directs them to preserve them. Committee considers subpoena for them. This was a really big deal. It led to an investigation of possible Presidential Records Act violations. Exact same act. But instead of involving a lobbyist named Jack Abramoff, it involves an interest group that we fund, dedicated to seeking fundamental transformation of our policies, energy and economic. So rather than being less serious than that, this should be more serious, but we'll find out. So this led to all sorts of a formal investigation, looking for indicting the Attorney General and so on, White House counsel. It used to be a big deal. So I have requested last month that all records produced on these sites be produced to me because they remain subject to FOIA. I've included in my request written discussion about this practice, whether to do it, how to do it, why to do it. All documents created or received by a federal government employee because they are still taxpayer records, and usernames and passwords, because if you're in, I'm in. We'll see what happened. I haven't gotten a response yet. But Congress followed suit. The House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology wrote a letter to the White House Director of Science and Technology Policy saying the same thing. We understand that you're setting up password-protected off-site websites to get around FOIA. We want the documents. We understand the U.S. is playing an important role in the preparation of the IPCC. Given that U.S. government resources are being used to fund U.S. participation in the IPCC, maintain these records in a manner consistent with the law. And then this is just a balance sheet of all of my money and fellow taxpayers' money just from the U.S. that's going to support this enterprise, which are also, in addition to the well, I suppose included therein are the dollars being used to set up off-site safe houses to make sure the people paying the bill don't get their grubby little hands on the records that they're due under the law. So, in closing, the problem that secrecy creates is, A, it's unlawful to the extent anybody finds that a problem. It also violates the tacit funding agreement. You want my money, you want my strings. What's been revealed already stinks and calls for revelation of the rest. Now, to the public, this clearly seems like misconduct. It did when it involved Bush, so I don't care what your feelings are about this. I mean, this is misconduct. When it's Bush, it is here now. The public accepts more than just sharp practice. We expect more than sharp practice. The global warming industry may not be offended. As we've seen from ClimateGate 1 and 2, they're very difficult to offend, at least when it involves their own behavior. But in trying to convince the public, because remember, that's what they're doing. That's the cause. It's a big failure. So the larger problem is the institutions of science, who have said, as one email Andrew quoted said, you know, I see we're trying to be rather sharp in our practice here. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not so sure that that's too smart in the long run. Chickens come home to roost. The institutions of science, which for better or worse are funded by the taxpayer, are the ones that are going to suffer, have already suffered, most of all. Because the truth will out. If nothing else, we have laws that say it will. From the US, we can get anything sent to them that's covered, and seems to be all covered. And in other countries as well, you can get most. So there will be fallout, there will be a price to pay. We suggest sooner rather than later because they're still pushing the cause. But remember, it is the institutions of science that will suffer in the long run the most.